Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Up today we're making a start on the Kill Team box, the new one. We'll be starting with the Ork Terrain that comes in the kit. And there really is a lot of it there. So I've come up with a simple colour scheme that we'll be able to apply across all of them really fast and efficiently. So we're going to be starting with a Vallejo game colour called Tinny Tin. Unfortunately, there's no GW equivalent of this paint that I'm aware of. A lot of people are using browns at this stage, but this is a kind of a brownish metallic. So it's pretty much the same thing, applying a dry brush over the entire miniature. This miniature has been primed in Chaos Black. These terrain pieces are very highly textured, so they take a dry brush extremely well. Here you can see the overall dry brush of Tinny Tin. I've got on the inside as well. I varied the pressure that I was applying while dry brushing across the miniature just to give it an ununiform finish, and there's some areas where I've applied more paint while reloading the brush, and that has given a kind of a more of an overbrush than a dry brush. But it's the lack of uniformity is what we're kind of really looking for. So up next we have Mephiston red, which we're going to apply to the back plate of the orc symbols. On this miniature there's one on the front and there's another one on the side. The advantage here is you don't have to be super neat, as it is supposed to be painted by either an orc or a grot, and I can't imagine they're all too strict about their painting. So now that the Mephiston red is done, as you can see it's not a perfectly smooth base coat, but it's good enough for orc work. So we're taking some grey Seer next, and we're going to apply it on the raised areas. Here you can see the grey Seer done on both sides. Again, you don't have to put that much effort into it. It doesn't have to be perfect. So next up we're going to take some Ryza rust on our large dry brush, and we're just going to stipple it in areas. How much you want to apply or where you apply it is solely up to yourself. Just try to keep it off the orc symbols that we've painted. Don't forget the top piece. So now that we've stippled over the Ryza rust, we're going to switch to a Leadbelcher on our dry brush, and we're just going to dry brush. I'm not dry brushing everywhere, and make sure you go over the orc symbol. It will tone down the Mephiston red and give it a nice worn look. So now that we've gone over the miniature with Leadbelcher, it just adds more variation. I varied the pressure and the amount of paint on the brush as well to give a varied finish. So next we're going back to grey Seer, and we're going to pick out any lights. There's only one on this miniature, that's this guy here, but some of the other ones have strings of light bulbs above the doors, and I think there's light bulbs on one of the other barricades as well. So we're just going to pick that out. Here you can see our little light finished. I went back over the cage with some Tinny tin just to tidy it up. You could call that an optional step if you wanted to, but I think the light bulbs on the other miniature are more prominent. It would look a lot better if painted. So next up we're going to get some Macragge blue. And we're going to be applying that again as an optional step to the cabling running from this fan down to this cylinder on the front. You can use the side of your brush in a similar way that you would edge highlight something to pick out a lot of them. Normally I'd use a red if I was painting cables, but with there already being red there, there's just an option or an opportunity to add a tiny bit more colour. And again, this is definitely an optional step, but I think it adds a lot to the finished piece. A little bit of hair. And again, the cables themselves are actually quite big, so painting them is easy enough. Here you can see the finished Macragge blue cable. It runs from the top through a little hole down to this little cylinder thing on the front, or large cylinder. I've also done one on the interior. Both steps are optional, but I think it adds a nice little extra pop of colour. So up next is the final step. This is definitely an optional step, and that is the use of a pigment. This one is from a company called Modeler's World, and it's called a Fresh Rust. And we're not going to be using it as a rust, we're going to be using it more as a dust to add a bit of extra colour or variation to the lower piece of the miniature. As you can see, it's quite bright, but once you put it on and you spread it around, it kind of tones it down a lot. So I'm using the Citadel large shade brush because it's nice and soft, and we're just touching it in. And first I'm going to dab it on and then spread it around and work it in. Any areas where it's too built up, I'm just going to go in with the brush and knock it off. Here you can see the finished piece after its dusting of pigment powder. I've stuck it to the lower regions just to make it look like dust. This technique is fast, doesn't rely on covering the entire miniature with shades, which I've seen some people do. I kind of think it's a bit wasteful because there is a lot of terrain pieces in the box. There's this one here that I've just painted. There's this one. There's the large oil pump, and there's scatter terrain. In fact, no, there's two of each. There's two of the large buildings. Here you can see one of the scatter terrain pieces, the little scrap piles. This is being primed black and dry brushed with the Tinny tin. Just to make it look a bit more interesting, visually interesting, we're just going to pick out some areas, like this large piece here. This yellow is Averland Sunset. We're going to apply that all over that piece, and maybe even one of these little tanks over here. I'm going to switch to a larger brush for this. Make my life a bit easier. So here you can see the Averland sunset area is completed. We're going to go back to Mephiston red and we're going to do the exact same thing. Just going to pick out a few parts. I'm going to do that tank there. Yeah, I think that's all I'm going to do on this one. Just make sure you batch paint all these scatter pieces as well. There's about 3 or 4 of them, so there's no point in stopping and starting each colour. So now that both the yellow and the red are done, we're going to take some Agrax Earthshade and just shade over those 2 colours. We're not looking to be super clean or tidy, we just want to muddy them up a bit. If you get some of the Agrax Earthshade on any of the other parts, it doesn't matter. It probably won't even be that noticeable anyway. So give that time to dry. And we'll come back then and dry brush the entire thing with Leadbelcher and apply some pigment powders to it, and we're done with the scatter pieces. So while the shade is drying, we're going to stipple on some Ryza rust onto the areas where we haven't applied the Agrax Earthshade, because obviously we don't want to stipple onto the wet pieces and it's just not going to work. Give this large sheet a bit of a dry brush. You're basically just looking for variation. It doesn't have to be perfect or even thought out. Now that the shade has been given time to dry, I'm just going to give the entire thing an all over dry brush of Leadbelcher. Just vary the amount of pressure you apply here and there. And here you can see your finished scrap pile. Here you can see a finished shot of everything that I've gotten done in one evening. Now this isn't the full kit. There's actually 2 more, or there's 2 more large buildings, 1 of each of these 2. And there's some platforms that are supposed to be used to join them up. Unfortunately I've run out of primer, so I can't finish them at the moment. If you liked anything in this video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching.